Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Clare Crew.
This is episode 125 of the Thriving Children podcast, and I'm Clare Crew. Today I'm speaking with early childhood author and advocate Heather Shumaker. Lovely to have you here, Heather, and thank you for writing It's Okay to Go Up the Slide.
You are most welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So what I love about your book is that it really demands for us to be courageous, to rethink ideas that we often take for granted in regards to home and school life for children. Many of us, for example, we have a sense that maybe some of our practices or some of what we see being done to children aren't really supportive of their development, and yet we stay on the cycle.
Yes, it happens to all of us. We get this kind of feeling in our stomach that something's not quite right, something's bothering us, but we think, well, the teacher must know, or everybody else is doing it, it must be okay, or it must be what my child needs. But we really need to listen to that inner voice, because often it's telling us, yeah, just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that's what children need. We need to think more from the child development point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. What I might do to start off with, Heather, is, if it's okay with you, read children's Renegade Rights that you have at the start of the book, because it's a beautiful introduction to some of the topics that you cover.
Lovely.
Okay, children's Renegade Rights. A right to plentiful, unstructured free play. A right to experience independence. A right to take risks and make mistakes. A right to set limits on others' behaviour. A right to be in charge of his own body. A right to age-appropriate learning. A right to regular daily school recess. A right to be free from homework in elementary school. A right to be outside daily. A right to move her body vigorously. A right to adequate sleep. A right to engage in the world in which he's growing up. A right to interact with the real non-screen world for the majority of her day. A right to learn and practice face-to-face social skills. A right to times of quiet. A right to learn healthy boundaries for technology. A right to receive regular, full attention from people around her. A right to have these rights consistently supported by adults. And as I said, that is just such a brilliant summary of really what you're arguing for in the book. And it's often common sense things, but as you hear them, you start to realize how disconnected that has become from many children's day-to-day reality. Now, obviously, you cover all of those things in the book. We can't cover them all in today's episode. So we're just going to pull out a couple. And I thought that a really good one to begin with is technology. Because children of today, they just have so much screen time. So I really want to ask you, should we be setting limits around that? And if so, how?
Yes, well, this is a topic for parents and families around the world. I think partly it's like with any new invention, we have to get used to it first. You know, when automobiles were invented, we had to get used to, we should teach children and set an age for when they can responsibly drive a car, or we need to invent sidewalks, and we need to set limits and invent traffic lights. So the same thing is happening with technology. It sort of came upon us, and now we need to figure out, well, how are we going to coexist in a way that makes sense for families and children? And I think when you look at technology, obviously there's wonderful benefits to it, but we have to navigate it. And one of the things we need to do is look at our own use of screens, and then the other is to look at children's use of screens. Because I think when we think about children and screens, we often focus on how they spend their time, when actually, especially with young children, so much of what they see is being modeled for them by how we have our heads down facing screens and ignoring them, or maybe not being fully present throughout our day. So I have one chapter about children and screens, but I really have an entirely separate chapter all about parents and screens.
Yeah, I love that. It's just so essential, I think, because as you were saying, we shine the spotlight on them, on the children, and yet our technology habits as adults needs to be recognized as part of the issue, because one of those renegade rights is that children deserve our full attention. And there are so many children, even just at school pickup time, where, you know, you just see the parents staring at their screen instead of saying hello to the child that they've been away from all day. It's really quite heartbreaking. And yet a lot of children are so used to it that maybe they're accepting it in that moment, even though long term it's doing some damage to that relationship.
Yeah, and I think also it teaches the children. I mean, you picked up a moment that's very sacred, which is when, let's say, the child is at preschool or some sort of daycare, and the parents coming home from work and picking them up. So many times, at least here in the States, the parents have the screen and they're focused on the phone instead of saying hello to their child. And that's a moment where social interaction, and it's an emotional time where you need to have that real life interaction. And put the phones away during that time. Put them away during meal times or whatever works for your family, but find some boundaries. We do not have to be the slave to the screen. We can use it as a tool and put it away. We don't have to have it always pinging and grabbing our attention. Because when we live with the screen interrupting us all day long, the child learns that that's how you do it. They learn it's okay to interrupt all day long. They learn that the on-screen world is much more interesting and exciting than the real world. And those aren't the messages we really want children to pick up, but they're learning every moment. They're learning from us.
Yeah. And so a big step of the how you feel is just to create those good boundaries for ourselves in terms of distancing ourselves from technology a little.
Yeah. we need to start with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, that's commonly heard in regards to any type of change making. The advice is always start with yourself, because you are modeling that change. And so many changes sort of ripple out from you just based on what you're doing. And it's easier to control your own self than it is to, you know, what you see around you in the wider world.
Right. And then as the children go, you know, one of the rights that you were reading was the right to times of quiet. I think that we often feel we need to stimulate and entertain our children at every moment, and that they can't just be bored or stare off into space or have their own thoughts or just lie on the floor doing nothing or running around outside doing nothing. What we see as nothing. And that they can cope with a little bit of boredom. We don't need to constantly have their minds stimulated by anything, including a screen, because they need time for their own thoughts, their own ideas for play. And what people have discovered takes the place, well, screens take the place of several things. You know, usually children still eat if they're using screens and so on. But the things that tend to go away when screens come on too hot and heavy is pleasure reading, time outside, and time for imaginative play like dress-up play or that kind of creative imaginative play. Those are the sorts of things that go out the door when screens fill it up too much. So if you're thinking, well, maybe my child's playing on the screen too much, think, when's the last time she went outside? Or when's the last time I really saw him play an imaginary game that went on for a while? Think about the things that it may be booting out in its place.
Absolutely. Some really good points there. And even just if it plants that seed of observation, I think that can be really powerful for people to see it with their own eyes.
Yeah.
All right, so we might move on now to the necessity of recess. In my eyes, it's time for moving, it's time for resting sometimes, it's time for play, and most of all, it's just time for freedom for the child to do what they feel they need to do next. And you've said in your book as well that it's as important as sleep at night. So I find it really interesting then that it continues to shrink across the world. Recess is getting smaller, and quite alarmingly, I discovered through your book that in some parts of America, it actually doesn't exist at all or barely. And it also, recess still seems to be an accepted form of punishment for children too.
Yes, yeah. I'm glad you brought this topic up because it is so near and dear to my heart. Um, Recess in the U.S., unfortunately, has been eliminated from many, many U.S. schools for children as young as kindergarten. So we're talking about 5-year-olds who have to sit through academic lessons all day long and not get any of their free time. And older children too. Also, a lot of American children, recess stops at 5th grade, so they only have it up to grade 4, because in 5th grade, some of them are in the older level of schooling. Luckily, my kids went to a school that had recess all the way through 8th grade, which is quite unusual. Another thing is punishment, that recess is used as a punishment. We will take it away if you don't behave. We will take it away if you didn't finish your spelling. We will take it away. All these threats loom over the children, and then they often get the recess taken away. There is a bright spot, at least in the U.S. The state of New Jersey just this year passed a law protecting recess. They only protected 20 minutes a day, but still it's protected. They have to give at least 20 minutes of recess. And the second part, which is hugely important, is they cannot take recess away as a punishment for any academic or behavior reason. And I really hope that other states and parts of the world will follow suit with that, because learning, I think adults misunderstand how learning works. For one, the child has to want to be at school and has to somewhat enjoy themselves in order to feel it's a safe place that they're curious about learning. So they need that break to be themselves. But also, the movement of recess helps their brains so they can have some good memory and focus and all that cognitive learning in the front portion of the brain. It's helped by recess. So if you want kids to learn and remember what you're teaching them, they need more recess rather than less.
Yeah, and that kind of, the children who need the recess the most are the ones who are often those who might not have finished their work in the classroom because focus and concentration might have been an issue, or they are the ones who aren't conforming in regards to their behaviour. And so they're the first ones to often miss out. And I don't think people are necessarily noticing that everything goes downhill for those children, even more so after that missed playtime. If they really wanted to create changes in the day from that point onwards, that recess time is exactly what was needed.
Yes. And, in the U.S., there's a lot of talk about obesity epidemic and, children getting overweight at younger and younger ages. And so one of the responses that adults have for this is to give the children gym time, but then take away their recess time. So they substitute physical education with a gym teacher instead of the recess, trying to get the kids moving. And although that's a worthy goal, it needs to be in addition. They can't take away the free time, because as one child put it to me, I said, what's the difference between the gym time and the recess? And he said, in gym, the teacher tells you what to do and your friends can't be on your team.
It's that loss of freedom. It is completely different, isn't it? The only thing that's similar is maybe the movement. But for some children, there is a lot of movement at recess time. And for others, there's a lot less as well. It's quite individual.
It's very individual. And I remember when I was a child, I spent quite a few recess times sitting on a nest of grapevines, pretending I was a bird hatching an egg. So I had to sit very still. And so it's not always about movement, as you said. It is very individual. But that's part of the emotional freedom and the social freedom, the imaginative freedom. The children find what they need to do for release. And if they don't get a chance for release, it's very hard for them to focus the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Behind you 100%. Another thing that definitely is happening here in Australia as well as in the US is that we have this thing called academic creep happening, where there seems to be in those first few years of school that tended to have lots of play and have more of a gentle introduction to formal learning. Almost as soon as they start, it comes on thick and fast, and often children aren't getting chance to play within that learning day except for at the break times. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that the academic creep is creeping to Australia as well, because I think it's certainly creeping many, many countries.
Yeah.
I think part of it is a problem because when adults analyze scientific reports, they tend to jump to the wrong conclusions. So we've been hearing for years that the ages 0 to 5, the early first 5 years of a child's life, are so vital for brain development. And people jump on that, I think misguidedly, and say, oh, well, then we need to get them reading even earlier. That's really not what the crucial years are all about. They are indeed for building the child's brain in all different categories, physical and social and emotional and the academic. But how a child in those years learns these academic skills is very different than how you might picture a typical school. So we sort of rush to try to do academic learning. What they've found through studies is that children who go to academic, say a preschool or early learning program that's very focused on learning to read and do math at those early years, is that they might be a tiny bit ahead of their peers who went to a play-based program the first year or so. But by third grade, it's all evened out. Any advantage they had to start is all evened out in their academic studies. And what's more, their behavior and their social skills are much worse. So they develop a more negative attitude towards school, which isn't too surprising because they were forced to do something that their brains weren't ready for at too early an age. So they kind of turned them against it. And they didn't have a chance to practice fairly difficult, challenging interactions, which we call social skills. If they don't have a chance to try all that when their brains are ready to start trying all that, then they never get a chance. They don't get time to practice the play and the interaction with their peers. So yeah, it's they said that kindergarten is the new first grade in the States, but now really it's age 4. Preschool is now the new first grade. They're pushing it younger and younger.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And yet you just want people to take notice. You want the decision makers to have an understanding of child development that informs them that this isn't okay, and to have a look at some of those findings, have a look at the research, and also have a look at the really appalling mental health of quite young children. I just think it spells out loud and clear that we're doing some things that aren't helpful to children and that we need to start doing things differently.
Yes, the children are telling us loudly and clearly. I call it kindergarten crash, when a child suddenly is required to do a lot of academics that their brains, it's not the right time for their brains to do it. And they're getting less playtime and less sleep. They're not even getting a nap time, that sort of thing. And they crash. They show us. They start crying. They'll collapse. They won't have energy to play. They start wetting their pants again. All sorts of behaviors you see when you pick them up from school or you see in the evening. This is the child telling you, I am stressed. They have stomach aches. They have headaches. They complain about, they don't want to go to school. They cry when you take them. This is all signs. They're telling you, they're waving their arms in the air and they're telling you, I'm stressed. This is not what I need right now. This is not what I need.
And so I'm pretty sure in the book you were mentioning that one of the best things you can do ideally would to choose an educational setting that doesn't push so hard, so quickly, that does have recess, things like that, but also that, if you can hold back and wait till your child's a little bit older before going, that's incredibly helpful too.
Yeah, and it depends. Everything like this is very individual. What I'm seeing in the U.S. is that a lot of families will choose to hold their child back because they realize that the kindergarten year is not helpful for their child. But then once a child has developed a year or so and they're ready for the next thing, they're actually held back because they're not in the right age group with their peers. So they get bored by the class because they were held back. So in some ways, some kids may benefit by waiting a year, and some may benefit by doing what I call an alternative kindergarten year, which means keep them with your favorite daycare person or with the grandmother or with a preschool program that's very play-based. Keep them there when they're 5. But then you can go directly to the first grade of school. You can skip over kindergarten. You don't have to do that year at all. And the rules may be different and the grades different in Australia, but the point is wherever you want to enter their formal school learning, you don't have to start at the beginning. You can homeschool, or you can do something that seems like that, even if someone else is taking care of them. That gives them the year of social play that they need, and then go directly to the grade that fits their age. So there's all kinds of ways of doing it. You just have to be creative and imaginative yourself to find the right solution for your child if the school down the street isn't going to fix itself in time for your little child coming along. There's ways that you can try to work it to meet the child's needs yourself.
Which starts, I guess, by, as you were saying, recognizing that gut feeling and that there's evidence behind that there is a need to be an advocate for your child and, you know, the wider group of children, and do things differently within your own family if need be.
Yeah, don't be afraid to go against the crowd and figure out what the options are, and feel that you don't have to be told what to do by other people, including the school system, that you need to decide and help guide what your child needs.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm right behind you with that, which kind of gets us on to my last question, in that being that the title of the book is It's Okay to Go Up the Slide, which is kind of what you were just talking about, we better touch on slide etiquette. So is it okay to go up the slide at the playground, Heather?
Yes. Well, this is actually one of my favorite topics because, as you say, it's a metaphor as well as a real event. Any parent who's taken a young child to the playground has experienced this. Oh no, my child is going up the slide, and what if somebody wants to come down it at the same time? However, I also have another book out. It's called It's Okay Not to Share. And that's actually the first book in this series. And it sets up a lot about conflict and how conflict between two children is an enormous opportunity for them to learn how to cope with problems and solve problems and cope with their big emotions that might come with these conflicts. And that if we try to prevent all the conflicts or help them through it too much, do it for them, then they don't get a chance to practice this incredibly important social skill, conflict mediation, and being able to control your emotions. Those are the two things that young children really need to learn if they need to learn anything. And those two skills will see them through the rest of their life. So that's all relevant to the slide, because really, what are we worried about when our child goes up the slide? Maybe that they might get hurt, depends on the child, what kind of shoes she's wearing, what mood she's in, how tall the slide is. You have to use some common sense. But mostly we're worried about a potential conflict with a child who might be at the top, who might want to come down. We're really worried about having a conflict with somebody else wanting to use the slide differently. And instead of worrying about that conflict, it's actually a fantastic opportunity for both children to learn that they can recognize, here's a conflict, tell the other child, hey, I want to come down, or, oh, I'm going up, and have them sort it out and say, I don't like it when you're hogging the slide, or you're in my way, or whatever they need to tell each other. And then they can solve the problem. They might need a little guidance from an adult, depending on their ages and so on, to help them sort through this. But a lot of times, kids who are interacting will end up even playing together and come up with some interesting imaginative play idea that involves climbing up the slide to get away from the poison mermaids or something. You never know what game they can create. We're so busy trying to keep them apart and not have them have a conflict. But maybe the conflict is teaching them more than anything else will. So I love the idea. I mean, slides were in... Every child who's ever encountered a slide will go up the slide at some point. Yeah. They just will. And they're searching for all sorts of things, risk and challenge. And it's fun. They go down the slide because it's fun. They go up the slide because it's fun.
Absolutely. And I have to admit that was what grabbed me about your book, the title, because I often find that, as my children, they're a little bit older now, but I was always the parent just kind of standing back and letting them go up the slide and letting them have those negotiations. And so I love that the title of the book and the cover, even for someone that may sort of skip past it in the library or the bookshop, it plants that seed of going, actually, this might be okay.
And it might be even helping your child gain the social skills and awareness of others even more than if they weren't growing up. But yes, it is a larger metaphor for all the other ideas in the book that are sort of bucking the conventional wisdom of schools and families. So it's the real slide and the metaphorical slide.
Encouraging us to be rebels.
Yes. Kind rebels.
Yes, absolutely. And knowledgeable rebels. So in bringing the episode to a close, Heather, could you please share where we can find you and also your books? I'm going to be adding It's Okay Not to Share to my reading list for next year.
Wonderful. Well, I have a website. It's my name, heathershumaker.com. But my books are available wherever books are sold, so your favorite local bookstore or online books. And as I say, there are 2 of them. And it's okay to go up. The slide focuses a little bit more on some of the school issues, but also has a lot that apply to any preschool or elementary age child. And It's Okay Not to Share really focuses on emotions and conflict and rough and tumble play and all sorts of other goodies.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Heather. It's been really nice to connect with you. And thanks again for writing such an engaging book.
You're welcome. And it's a pleasure. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Thriving Children podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourself.
Thanks for listening to the Thriving Children podcast. For even more goodness, visit thrivingchildren.com.au.